As I've talked about in various live streams, and possibly to anyone who will listen to me, the Cold War at the time it was happening was not an event in the same way that something like the Second World War was. It was instead just the permanent background to everyday life. It permeated everything from politics and economics to arts and culture, and it was reflected in all of those things. I'm your host David, and as promised a few months ago, we are going to look at how the Cold War reflected itself into one of the cultural touchstones of Western science fiction, Star Trek. Prepare to boldly go where no man has gone before. This is the Cold War.
I grew up with Star Trek, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings, and then as an adult have found myself drawn into the worlds of Tamriel, Westeros, and Redania and Skellige. And what draws me into these worlds of science fiction and fantasy is the deep lore and the histories that are built into them. And there is no better way to explore these worlds than with our friends at Wizards and Warriors. They are creating documentary-style videos looking at the politics, the wars, and the battles of a multitude of different sci-fi and fantasy universes. Need to know what Conan thinks is best in life? Well, Wizards and Warriors has got your back. Make sure to check out their work today by clicking the link in the description.
In 1969, Isaac Asimov wrote that the dropping of the atomic bomb in 1945 made science fiction respectable. Science fiction writers were not merely dreamers and crackpots after all, and that many of the motifs of that class of literature were now permanently part of the newspaper headlines. The end of the Second World War and the beginning of the Cold War ushered in a boom for the genre of science fiction, a golden age in which Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Philip K. Dick, Frank Herbert, and many other authors would begin to be popular authors. The increased popularity of this genre came at a time when political tensions were high, technological advancements were booming, and American society was facing complex changes in its structure. Many of these authors used their genre of choice as a chance to offer a commentary and a critique of society. Science fiction in this era was less about the future and more about holding up a mirror to the present in a way that might help engineer a better future. And in the mid-1960s, into this era of science fiction as a social and political critique came Gene Roddenberry and his Wagon Train to the Stars. Roddenberry pitched the idea for Star Trek in 1964, and the show would run from 1966 to 1969, following the crew of the USS Enterprise, comprised of both humans and aliens, exploring the galaxy on behalf of the United Federation of Planets, on a 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. The series presented an optimistically progressive future of exploration, diversity, and equality. But as much as Star Trek was a series ahead of its time, it was also firmly a product of the social and political conflicts of the 1960s. Many episodes of the series took on socially progressive ideals like the civil rights movement. Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There is no room for it on the bridge. In the 14th episode of the first season, the episode entitled Balance of Terror, Captain Kirk utters this line as he scolds a crew member for his racial judgment of the Vulcan, Spock, portrayed by Leonard Nimoy. This episode, among many others, expressed the views that Roddenberry had about the racism of the 1960s. In an interview on Good Morning America in 1986, Roddenberry talked about how the studio wanted an all-white, all-male crew on the Enterprise. Roddenberry ignored that and gave the viewers a diverse cast that included an African-American woman, Lieutenant Uhura, played by the late Nichelle Nichols. The casting of Nichelle Nichols brought about yet another push for civil rights in the episode, Plato's Stepchildren, in which Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura became the first interracial kiss on American network television. This episode also includes a line from Captain Kirk in which he says, quote, "Where I come from, size, shape, or color makes no difference." Only a little over a year before that, interracial marriage had still been illegal in 17 American states. There was only 17 months between the Supreme Court's Loving versus Virginia ruling in June of 1967 and the airing of Plato's Stepchildren in November of 1968. Episodes like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield also address the issue of racism when the Enterprise comes across a planet of literally half-black and half-white aliens who are racially biased against those who are white on the right side instead of black on the right side. The writers tie this in quite blatantly to the civil rights struggle of the day. The ship's navigator, an ethnic Russian named Pavel Chekhov, portrayed by Walter Koenig, states, "There was persecution on Earth once. I remember reading about it in my history class." In response, the helmsman of the Enterprise, Hikaru Sulu, a man of Japanese ancestry, played by George Takei, states, "Yes, but it happened way back in the 20th century. There's no such primitive thinking today." In the end, this hatred leads to the mass murder and genocide of their entire planet, with Kirk saying, quote, "Your planet is dead. There's nobody alive on Charon because of hate." This was clearly intended as a warning to the 1960s audience of what would come for our own world if we could not let go of racial intolerance. And those watching understood the message being delivered. At an NAACP meeting during the first season of the show, Nichelle Nichols had a conversation with Martin Luther King Jr., in which he told her, "We don't need you on the streets to march. You are marching. You are reflecting what we are fighting for. For the first time, we are being seen the world over as we should be seen." Or, as Whoopi Goldberg, who would later go on herself to act in Star Trek The Next Generation, said when she first watched Star Trek at 9 years old, "Everybody come quick, come quick. There's a black lady on television and she ain't no maid." But it wasn't just the socio-political issues of civil rights that Roddenberry and his writing team would work to critique. They would also become one of the first series on television to confront the politically polarizing issue of the war in Vietnam. Many television shows had been too fearful about the possibility of alienating viewers, losing advertisers, or facing censure by network executives to address something so controversial in a head-on fashion. But because of the far distant setting of Star Trek, the series was able to address the issues of Vietnam by displacing the conflict in time and space. In an oral history of Star Trek, Roddenberry said, quote, "It seemed to me that perhaps if I wanted to talk about sex, religion, politics, make some comments against Vietnam, and so on, that if I had similar situations involving these subjects happening on other planets to little green people, indeed, it might get by." And it did. To make it even more obvious, Roddenberry would make clear parallels between the major races of the series and the key nations of the Cold War, the United States and the USSR. The Federation, Kirk, and the Enterprise were a clear stand-in for the United States, the best elements of American society, which Roddenberry would use to critique some of what he saw as less admirable traits of American government and society throughout the series. The Klingons were a militaristic and authoritarian society playing the role of the Soviet Union. The Federation and the Klingons were locked in a decades-old conflict, sometimes directly in a shooting war, but one that was often carried out covertly or through proxies instead. Not too much of a stretch to apply the small screen situation to the real world of the 1960s. And another parallel can be found with the Romulans, although we should point out that they only briefly appeared as an antagonist in 2 episodes of the original series. In Roddenberry's original concept of the Romulans, they represented 1960s Chinese communists, or more broadly, communist Asia in general, playing into stereotypes of secretive and labyrinthian societies. This can be seen in the episode The Enterprise Incident, in which Kirk deliberately crosses the neutral zone into Romulan territory in a secret mission to steal Romulan technology, and he and the ship are captured. The writer of the episode, DC Fontana, has stated that the story is based on the capture of the American ship USS Pueblo by Communist North Korea in 1968. And the Enterprise Incident wasn't alone in reflecting Cold War tensions. Many episodes contained content clearly influenced by the Cold War, with the writer's views about the conflict evolving extensively over time. In episodes of the series like A Taste of Armageddon, the series appears to clearly condemn the proxy wars of the Cold War. In this episode, 2 planets, Eminiar 7 and Vendikar, have long been engaged in a war, but it's a war fought entirely with computers. Casualties are calculated, and the victims then report to disintegration stations, a solution to all-out war designed to preserve civilization, even at the cost of lives. One character, Anand 7, describes the damage a real war would cause. Quote, "Millions of people horribly killed, complete destruction of our culture. Here, yes, and the culture of Vendikar. Disaster, disease, and starvation, horrible lingering death, pain and anguish." End quote. Kirk then points out that those horrors are why wars are avoided, and that because there is no real impact from the war, they have no real motivation to end it. A clear criticism of the way that the Cold War was being fought, never seeming to directly touch the real lives of many of the citizens of the two superpowers, since it was allowed to continue playing out through proxy wars on foreign soil. In the end, Kirk destroys the computers that calculate the war, forcing the citizens of Mniar 7 and Vendikar to either accept the costs of war personally or find a way to end the war. There's a shift in tone, however, with the episode The City on the Edge of Forever, which aired in April of 1967. This coincided with the rapidly growing anti-war movement in regard to American involvement in Vietnam. In this episode, time travel leads to a world in which the Nazis won the Second World War, the result of a peace activist named Edith Keeler being saved by Dr. McCoy. If she lived, her pacifist beliefs would be allowed to spread, leading to an America which would fail to enter the war quickly enough to prevent the Third Reich from developing an atomic bomb and winning the war. H. Bruce Franking, history professor emeritus at Rutgers, writes, "The City on the Edge of Forever was clearly a parable suggesting that the peace movement directed against the US war in Vietnam, no matter how noble, alluring, and idealistic in its motivation, might pose a danger to the progressive course of history. The episode projected the view that sometimes it is necessary to engage in ugly, distasteful action, such as waging remorseless warfare against evil expansionist forces like Nazi Germany or the Communist Empire attempting to take over Indochina, even doing away with well-intentioned, attractive people who stand in the way of such historical necessity." This justification seems to continue with A Private Little War in February of 1968, which had clear parallels to the proxy war conflicts of the Cold War once again. In this second season episode, the Enterprise crew discovers that their Klingon enemies have been arming one tribe on a primitive planet with flintlock muskets. Captain Kirk chooses to try to even the odds by arming the other tribe with the same weaponry, sparking an argument with Dr. McCoy, where Kirk directly references the Vietnam War as a 20th century brush war on the Asian continent. Kirk justifies his decision to arm the other tribe as being a necessary balance of power, which Professor Franking then compares to what the United States was trying to do in Vietnam. The timing of this episode could not have been more perfect. It had been planned, airing less than a month after the beginning of the Tet Offensive on January 31st, 1968, making the message even more powerful for the American viewing public. And while A Private Little War served to somewhat justify American involvement in the conflict in Vietnam, the mood of later episodes would take on a much more anti-war message. From episode 16 of the second season to episode 23, the tone changed dramatically with the Omega Glory, in which the Enterprise comes to a planet with two warring factions, the Yangs and the Coms, names which Kirk and Spock quickly decipher, the Yankees and the Communists. This comparison is made even more clear when we find that the Yangs' most sacred text is a copy of the US Constitution. In a climactic scene, Kirk gives a speech on how the principles of the Yangs' sacred document were meant to be for all people, not just the elite, not just those like you, but everyone, even your enemies. We the people must apply to everyone or they mean nothing. And don't get me wrong, there's certainly a strong pro-American propagandist feel to the scene, but in the late 1960s, America was not so far removed from the Red Scare and McCarthyism that declaring that the communists, the Coms, deserved the Constitution's protections was not a risky proposition for the series. Coming back to the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, the episode mentioned earlier with the race of half white and half black people, the racial and political tensions of civil rights and the Cold War are brought together in a single episode, which comments on the disproportionate number of deaths being suffered by African Americans in Vietnam. Kirk warns that you both must end up dead if you don't stop hating, a message meant to remind us of the potential for mutually assured destruction that could be the result of the Cold War. Now, Star Trek was abruptly cancelled in 1969, but gained a cult following in the decades that followed. The growing popularity of the genre of science fiction would eventually resurrect the series with a series of motion pictures between 1979 and 1991 as the Cold War got colder and then suddenly came to a close. Over the course of the original series, the conflict between the Federation and the Klingons, described by Spock as almost 70 years of unremitting hostility, would play a major role as an overall critique of the Cold War. In 1991, with Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, the Cold War between the Klingons and the Federation came to a thematic end, just as the decades of hostility between the USSR and the United States were themselves coming to an end. The fall of the Berlin Wall in space, as actor and film writer Leonard Nimoy put it. In the opening scenes of the movie, Praxis, a Klingon moon used as a primary energy source for the Klingon Empire, explodes, causing massive pollution but severe shockwaves to the Klingon economy as they are forced to compensate for the devastation. This acts as a clear parallel to the 1986 explosion at Chernobyl. Further in the film, the Khitomer Accords and the Federation-Klingon peace talks mirror the end of the hostilities between the USSR and the United States. The end to hostilities comes with its own problems, both in the world of Star Trek and the real world, but Star Trek VI warns us about that as well when Kirk says, "Your father called the future the undiscovered country. People can be very frightened of change." We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes, be sure to like and subscribe and bring glory to you and your house by pressing the bell button. Don't be a patak, press it. A huge thank you to all of our Patreon patrons, and if you aren't already, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.